When I first started deconstructing from Christianity and questioning everything that I believed in, there was a biblical passage that really held me back for a long time. I felt like I would take a few steps outside of Christianity and then I would remember these verses and I would revert right back. And I'm willing to bet that these passages probably hold a lot of people back, especially if they have been very heavily indoctrinated in the Christian church. And so what I want to do today is approach this passage and deconstruct it from the perspective of someone who has been long gone from the Christian church. I've been out for over 10 years now, and I see things very, very differently. Now, these passages come from Romans 9, and if you've been watching my content, you know that Romans 9 was a catalyst for my deconstruction and my deconversion from Christianity. It is a very important part of my journey, but there are just a cluster of verses that really stick out as something that I feel like we need to deconstruct. And so I want to go over them today and let's talk about it. In Romans 9, starting in verse 20, it says, "But who are you, O man, to answer back to God? Will what is molded say to its molder, 'Why have you made me like this?' Has the potter no right over the clay to make out of the same lump one vessel for honorable use and another for dishonorable use? What if God, desiring to show his wrath and make his power known, has endured with much patience vessels of wrath prepared for destruction, in order to make known the riches of his glory for vessels of mercy, which he prepared beforehand for glory." Now, Paul in this passage is echoing the words in Jeremiah 18:2-6, where it says, "Arise and go down to the potter's house. There I will let you hear my words. So I went down to the potter's house, and there he was working at his wheel. The vessel he was making of clay was spoiled in the potter's hands, and he reworked it into another vessel, and it seemed good to the potter to do so. Then the word of the Lord came to me, O house of Israel, can I not deal with you as this potter has done, declares the Lord? Behold, like the clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel." Now, there are a lot of interpretations for these passages. Please keep in mind that on my channel, we deconstruct the Protestant, fundamentalist, conservative, evangelical bubble of Christianity, which is a very large bubble. But there are so many varying views and interpretations within Christianity, it would be impossible for me to address all of them. So I work within what I know, which is the fundamentalist evangelical framework. Now, I will say that when I was in the church and I read this passage, it brought me a lot of comfort. Because as a Christian, I felt like I was special and favored by God. I was in his hands. He had me. He was protecting me. He loved me. And, my fate was set. It was being molded by God. And that was a good feeling because I thought that I worshiped a God who loved me, who wanted me to be happy and be free and to love him back and to have this wonderful existence and eternity with him. And so when I had that version of God in my head, I had no problem with him being my maker, being my molder. I was taught that I was inherently bad. I was inherently flawed. Nothing I could ever do could ever be good enough for God. And so if the maker of the universe has decided to take me into his palms and shape me into what he wants me to be, well, then obviously it's going to be beneficial for me. It's going to be a good thing. But when I started questioning Christianity, when I started thinking more about my beliefs, thinking more about the God that I believed in, and my perspective of God shifted drastically. And I no longer believed in a God who really loved me and wanted my best interests. He created me specifically so he could make me what he wanted me to be. It was a little less comforting. I didn't find as much comfort in the idea that this God has created me with a specific idea in mind of who I should be and what should happen to me. And it says here in Romans 9, "What if God, desiring to show his wrath and make known his power, has endured with much patience vessels of wrath prepared for destruction, in order to make known the riches of his glory for vessels of mercy?" So this is, although people will say, well, look, he says, what if? He's just kind of throwing out a hypothetical. I don't know why he would throw this hypothetical out if he wasn't trying to make a point about how God treats people. And if you go back to Jeremiah, it's very obvious that God is literally saying, like, I can do what I want with you. I am the potter. You are the clay in my hands. Don't question me. I can do whatever I want with you, and I will. And that really, I struggled with that. I struggled with that a lot because I thought, well, no matter how many questions I have, no matter how much criticism comes up, no matter how much I don't like the intentions, characteristics, behaviors of this God, does it really matter since I'm in his world and he made me and I am just clay in his hands? The entire process made me feel so small and so insignificant and so trapped. And it's so interesting because with this God, with this religion, you're told that you will find peace and freedom like you could never find outside of it. But I was finding the complete opposite. I was finding that I didn't have freedom. Whether I was a Christian or not, if God ran the world, I had no freedom. I'm a piece of clay. I don't have autonomy. I'm not deciding anything for myself. He's calling the shots. He's making all of the rules. He's deciding how things will go. And so I felt, I don't know how to explain it, but all of the sudden, I felt like I was living in this existence that was entirely outside of my control. And I'm not talking about the world around me. Obviously, I can't control what's happening around me, but there's a lot about myself and my future that I can decide, that I can control. But I didn't realize that at that time because I felt like there's nothing I can control. I don't get a say in any of this. And everything I do is being shaped and willed by God. But then I came to a point where I realized that I am not a piece of clay, that I wasn't being accurately described by these biblical texts, that my maker, the God who created me, was reducing me down to an inanimate object that he could just mold and toss if he wanted to. But that's not what I am. If God created me, he made me a sentient being, a very unique individual with a unique perspective, experiences, thoughts, feelings, desires, needs, wants, fears, traumas, hopes. All of those things are alive and well within me. I'm not just a lump of clay. If I was just a lump of clay, then sure, God could do whatever he wanted with me and it would be no problem. Maybe God should have actually created lumps of clay if that's what he wanted. If he wanted beings that he could just shape and mold and do whatever he wanted with, then he should have just become an artist. He should have just got into sculpting, created a bunch of clay, and just spent eternity up in the heavenly realm creating whatever he wanted to create. But that's not what he did. If he exists and he created us, we are sentient beings. We have thoughts and feelings. We are complex creatures. And if you're going to create sentient beings who desire autonomy, who desire freedom, would it not be entirely cruel to reduce them down to inanimate objects that you can do whatever you want with? I'm not saying what God can do. God can do whatever he wants if he exists. He's all powerful. He's sure, he can do whatever he wants. But it's not about what he can do. It's about what he should do, what is ethically aligned, what is morally okay to do. And if we're looking at treating people with fairness and kindness and compassion, I don't see that in a God who creates human beings with these complex inner workings and then ignoring or disregarding all of those complex inner workings so that you can reduce them down to just a thing to be molded, just a thing, a piece of clay without any thoughts or feelings or anything at all. And I think a good God would value autonomy. I think if God has autonomy and he likes autonomy, then he would understand that his created beings also want and like autonomy. He could have created us without the desire for autonomy. But instead, we all have that desire to be free, to be able to live our lives the way we please. Even if you please being a Christian, you have the choice, the freedom to do that. And I think all of Romans 9, I think especially like these passages really drive this point that God did not give humanity free will. Like you cannot read this and make it compatible with free will, because free will would be the ability to act without the constraint of consequence or fate, the ability to do what you do and what you want to do, to do what you will to do. But if God is creating your will, or if he is altering your will, or if he's just doing whatever he wants regardless of your will, well, you do not have free will. If you are a lump of clay in your potter's hand, clay doesn't have free will. Clay doesn't get to make any of its own choices. It's just there for the potter to do whatever he wants with. And so when God reduces us down to just this lump of clay, I'm thinking, you're not a nice God. You're not treating me with kindness and fairness. And if you created me knowing that I would want autonomy, if you created me knowing I would not believe in this system, if you created me knowing that I wouldn't agree with this system or want to be a part of it, then the best thing you could have done from the beginning is just not create me. Just never have created me, never have put me here. Because that would be the kindest thing you could do, rather than creating me knowing I wouldn't want to participate in this system God has created, knowing I wouldn't want to be his lump of clay, and still creating me anyway, still creating me and then punishing me for not being what he wanted me to be. And I'll end with this. And this is kind of the most important point that I come to in this passage. If we are just clay in God's hands and we aren't turning out the way God wants us to turn out, we're just sinners, we're unbelievers, we're destined for hell. If we are not what God wants us to be as his clay, then what God is doing when he tosses us into hell or punishes us or whatever he does is he's being a toddler with some Play-Doh that won't turn out the way they want it, and then just throwing it on the floor because they get really angry that it's not coming together the way they envisioned it. And if God is molding me and shaping me and I'm just clay in his hands and I'm not satisfactory for him, well, that's his fault. That's not my fault. I shouldn't be blamed for not turning out the way God wanted me to turn out when he's the one in control, when he's the one shaping me and molding me. How silly is that? For God to create me, to mold me, to make me into this thing that he hates, that he doesn't like, and then get angry and punish me for not turning out the way he wanted me to turn out. Maybe he should get better at sculpting. I don't know, but that's the thing. It's his fault. I'm an artist. Okay. I paint murals. And if a mural or a piece of art didn't come out the way I wanted it to, I would not blame the paint. I wouldn't blame the art. I would have to blame myself because I'm the one making the art. It's all in my control. And so to blame anyone or anything but me when my own art doesn't turn out the way I want to would be absolutely silly. And so it's equally as silly, if not more, for an omnipotent, omniscient God to create human beings, to reduce them down to pieces of clay, inanimate objects, and then get angry when they don't turn out the way he wants them to turn out. And I just wanted to share this today because I think a lot of people probably do struggle with this idea that, well, God created the universe and I'm just kind of here and he gets to make all the rules, so I don't really get to have a say in any of it. If you're feeling that way, just remember that this is a very convenient message to send to people when you want to control them. When a man gets up on a pulpit in front of a congregation and he says, God chose me, He gave me these words to speak to you, and I'm just relaying the message. And he told me that you are just a lump of clay in his hands, and he's going to do whatever he wants with you, and you don't get to question that. I think that's very beneficial for him, because he's speaking for God. And so kind of by default, you don't get to question him either. And I think that we should be aware of these things, aware of the messaging that is being put out there, the way it is affecting your mind and your mental health, how you view yourself, how you view the world, how you view God, how you view spirituality. When you believe that you are just reduced down to a lump of clay, you're probably not going to feel very good about yourself. And if you believe God is the one shaping you and he's so great and loving and kind and wonderful, then fantastic. But you still don't have autonomy. And once you start making that leap, asking questions, applying scrutiny, changing your mind about what you believe in, once you get to that process, it's no longer a comforting thing. You're no longer comforted by the fact that you're just an inanimate object at God's whim. And I think for a lot of people, it probably causes a lot of confusion and fear and guilt. And it's just all of those bad feelings that I don't think anybody should be feeling when they're just trying to seek truth and find God and know that what they believe is true. And so I just want to remind you today that you are not a lump of clay. You're not an inanimate object. You are a human being with feelings and thoughts and emotions. You are complex. You have desires, you have fears, you have all of these things inside that shape you and move you and drive you. And if God wanted to strip you of your humanity, he would have never made you human in the first place. And I just think that's really important to keep in mind. So I thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. That helps me out a lot. You can hit the like button, leave a comment, share it with someone who might be deconstructing and might find this message helpful. Let me know what you thought in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget, I do have a merch shop. It's jezebelvibes.com/shop. I will link it in the description of this video. You can also follow me on TikTok at Christy.Berg. I'll see you next time.